All right. Hey everyone. Week 10 of our series, Follow Me Through the Gospel of Mark. And yesterday we were in Mark chapter 10. And this is David, by the way. I'm here with Dan Williams, Keith Indovino, Danny Rivera. I'll kick us off. I've missed the last 3 weeks of this series because of travel. And I through a series of events, I actually wrote yesterday's message a week in advance, basically so that I wouldn't be writing a message while I was on vacation. And I don't know if I've done that before, and I don't think I'd do it again. It's a weird experience preaching something you wrote a week ago, even though I revisited it, of course, the day before. So first service felt clunky. I was just trying to get through the content, and that happens sometimes anyway. But second service was felt more like I had a good sense of where we were going. But I think for us, as we broke the message down in the idea that Jesus is teaching us some truths about the kingdom, life in the kingdom, leadership in the kingdom, and love in the kingdom. And in the first point where we talked about life in the kingdom and the juxtaposition of James and John's expectations of what was going to happen. They're headed to Jerusalem next week, Mark 11. The rest of the gospel were in Jerusalem, the last week of Jesus' life. And James and John are right about one thing, that things are coming to a close, but they're wrong about everything else, right? And their expectation of crowns and thrones and ascension, while Jesus is talking about the cup and the cross and this descending into this baptism of suffering, couldn't be more off base, right? So I think one of the things that we really leaned into in our message yesterday was how we still do that. Like we have this expectation of what life of following Jesus should or could look like. And then we're hit with the reality of in this world, you'll have tribulations and struggle and surrender and suffering. And I just had gone on two back-to-back trips. One was a mission trip to Colombia, and one was a family vacation to Disney. And it just occurred to me as I was up there that, like, the mentality that I have when I go on short-term missions trips is I will give everything and get nothing. This isn't about me, right? It's about giving. But then you go to Disney a week later and it's like, get everything. And this sort of like whiplash of Columbia to Disney. And I had this realization as I was trying to make this make sense for our people that one of the challenges we have in following Jesus is he's calling us to Columbia and we're expecting Disney. And having the wrong expectations and mindset of what it means to follow him, what it will cost us, and what it will look like. And Jesus is clearly, I think, trying to confront James and John and all the disciples with their expectations of what's going to happen next and what it actually means to be a part of the kingdom life. So I think when I was able to make that illustration, I could feel in the room, it was like that clarity of, oh my goodness, I'm expecting Disney, I'm called to Columbia. And when I try to make those two experiences mesh, it creates a lot of, makes you disenfranchised, disappointed, right? Even discouraged or angry at God or yourself. So that was what was one of the things that stood out to me. Danny, we'll jump to you.
Pastor Myra preached this Sunday. She did an excellent job of just saying that this kingdom that we're being called into requires this humility, and she began to break down why they wanted positions over servanthood, and how they really still didn't get it. And our call to humility is really where is really the crux of the call. Is that we're not looking for positions. We're not looking to be on a Disney World trip, to use your words, Dave. But that we're looking to walk in humility, and whatever that costs, that's where God is taking us. And she just did a marvelous job of just helping the church understand that though it's countercultural, that's the way it should be. And she did a phenomenal job. I heard a little bit of your sermon to begin. I couldn't finish it because I was running around, but I agreed with what you said, man. It was super solid, super great Sunday, and I think Myra did a great job.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. Dan Williams.
Yeah, I kind of landed pretty heavy at the end when we got to the phase of the message that was kingdom greatness demonstrated, and Jesus has already said he's going to be rejected, he's going to be betrayed, he's going to be suffering, and he's going to be crucified. And he said that a couple times already, and now he starts to describe his purpose. And I got really emotional myself when started to connect, was about to connect what Jesus said with the prophecy of Isaiah, that he will be pierced for our transgressions. And as I went through that prophecy, just the idea that his followers and listeners knew the scriptures, at least the Hebrew ones knew the scriptures, and had been anticipating that there would be some kind of Messiah. And here he is again pointing out that it's not a Messiah who rules with a crown and a throne, but it's a Messiah who's going to rule with a cross and execution and death. And so obviously there was the heaviness in the room, at least in some part generated by me getting emotional at the thought of Jesus is now articulating once again, that prophecy in Isaiah. Here I am, and I'm going to demonstrate kingdom humility with my ransom death. And that last part of that prophecy where he says that he laid on him the sins of us all, I could barely hold it together.
Yeah.
So I think for me, what was heavy was just the realization that the one they were waiting for was right under their nose, and they still wanted someone different. Um, yeah, and that knowing the prophecy, memorizing the prophecy, hoping in the prophecy doesn't necessarily mean that you see it when it's there. And Jesus is demonstrating that serving, that slavish belonging to the will of the Father. And so that's where I think the weightiest print happened to my listener.
Yeah, that's just the way that passage ends with Jesus, talking about his role not to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. Uh,
Yeah,
so powerful in terms of, I forget who said it. It was in the commentary somewhere. It basically said like if the God who, I'm gonna get it wrong. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Um, He said, if the one who created both the supernova and the firefly and holds them together by the word of his power became our servant, our waiter, how can we do less?
yeah,
Such a kind of
so
punch in
good.
the throat moment of conviction. Yeah. Keith, share with us how things went.
Yeah. So we had it was a great Sunday in that we did a family dedication service. So the room was filled with people who you just knew were new to church or maybe didn't want to be there, but they were there because they were invited and there was sort of a child dedication happening. And
Yeah.
that always, like, you guys know as preachers, it kind of does something in you to be more aware of the fact of how is this going to connect with people who may not believe in Jesus or even desire to be in the room. So knowing that, I kind of framed the message around um, how everyone is familiar with a life plan or a life coach. And typically, life coaches and a life plan will include three aspects: avoid suffering at all costs, make a name for yourself, and experience love. And from that springboard went into how the way of Jesus is upside down and introduces the things you're running from, suffering, humility, and sacrifice, are actually what you most need to live a complete life. We spent the most time on suffering, and made the jarring statement of to follow Jesus is to embrace suffering. And we expounded on how he used the cup and the baptism um, to explain, you want this, but you may not understand it yet. Can you drink from my cup? Can you be baptized with my baptism? And just stood there for a while in the sermon to explain the life of a follower of Jesus will include embracing the cup and going through a baptism of suffering. To which then I said, well, then why would you want to do this? If you could suffer and kind of live for yourself and make a name for yourself that seems more appealing, and provided the truths that when believers suffer, we do so by identifying with Jesus and his suffering, and we suffer temporarily knowing there's an eternal hope. A lot more time there in his words, kind of the beginning statements of James and John with him and expounding it. I felt that people did to that, and it was a very like real, honest invitation. Hey, if you want to know Jesus, if you want to follow him, know on the front end, he's not promising you a life free of suffering. He's saying to follow me is to embrace this. So I felt the message was handled with integrity, that we didn't, sell something Jesus doesn't try to sell, of just come follow me. And, I kind of used a little joke of the cup he's talking about is not a latte. This is not something that you want to drink from, but you have to be ready for it. And the fact that he suffered to give us access to his kingdom. So it was a good Sunday.
Yeah, there's an interesting idea in the text about the cup, right? Because at first reading, it can seem like Jesus says, "Are you able to drink the cup?" That he's speaking of this specific cup that he's going to drink, right? Garden of Gethsemane, let this cup pass, or if there's a way for this cup to pass. And yet, this cup is more of a shared destiny, shared path of suffering and surrender. And even though he says to James and John, "You will drink the cup," because he knows, John is going to be the first, or James is going to be the first martyr of the early church, or not the first martyr, the first of the 12 to be martyred. John will be exiled to Patmos and will suffer. But when you get to the end of the text and he's talking about being a ransom, you realize there's a cup that only Jesus could drink. And, I think it happened to be Communion Sunday for us. We normally do it the first Sunday of a month, but for a variety of reasons, it was this Sunday. And it just led us into obviously a really meaningful moment in terms of the cup that Christ drank, the cup that we drink, the cup of surrender and suffering, but the cup we drink now in communion of remembrance, celebration, and gratitude. I found myself so moved, even in the midst of the message, by Jesus' words to James and John, "You don't know what you're asking for." And I didn't prep that part a lot, so I couldn't say much in the moment, but it's been sticking with me since. Like, how many times do we not know what we're asking for?
Yeah.
And how did Jesus say that? Sometimes I wish we had like emojis so we could see like Jesus was moved, he was sad, he was angry, he was frustrated. Like there's different ways to read that statement based on how you perceive his emotions to be. But yeah.
By now, Jesus is already in the shadow of of the cross, right? I mean, he can feel it. It's starting to settle in. So I imagine that those you don't know what you're asking for, and you know, I can't believe he just misinterpreted what my kingdom is going to be again. Right here on the heels, or right here on the cusp of walking into that dark valley is pretty intense, and the Chosen captures it pretty well. One of my favorite parts of the Chosen is when they portray James and John asking for their promotion after their mom pulled them aside and said, "You guys are not getting what you deserve. You need to get up there and ask the rabbi for a special place because you've been with him from the beginning." So mom was behind the scenes stoking it up. I love that. Like a mom who's mad that her kid's not getting enough playing time.
Yeah, Matthew's account, she's very involved. In fact, in Matthew's
Yeah,
account, she asked the question, I think, which is interesting. But I
I love
really
that.
quickly it mentioned, James and John, chapter 9, they're on the Mountain Transfiguration with Peter. So they're in this inner circle, and it's still not enough. They're trying to cut Peter out. And now imagine if Jesus said to James and John, "Sure, one of you can sit on my right, one of you can sit on my left. You guys decide which."
Yeah.
It would have got uglier. Just I quickly mentioned it just shows how the human heart, power and access and influence is never enough. Like we're always wanting more, and these guys hunger for glory and power on the heels of Mount Transfiguration, where they saw unthinkable glory and power. It's just really, anyway, interesting. But any final thoughts from anyone else?
Jesus doesn't rebuke them. He invites them. He's willing to have this conversation with them. And
Hmm.
I think that that's what the point of Mark is. It's just he wants to reveal to them their hearts. He wants to transform their hearts. And I love that when Jesus, he's not saying, "Guys, come on, we're at this again." He doesn't say, "Ye of little faith." He doesn't say any of
Hmm.
those things. He welcomes the conversation
but flips it on his head and says, this ambition is just misplaced. You don't know what you're asking for. And I thought that was really graceful. Pastor Myron mentioned that yesterday. It was really graceful, really beautiful of Christ to welcome the conversation, to not rebuke them, but to show them the deception of their heart for what God really wants to do with them.
That's good. All right, next week we're on Mark 11. Jesus is heading into Jerusalem. We're getting towards the last week of his life. We'll see you guys then.